Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's an absolute pleasure and delight to be talking to my friend Tim Foresman this afternoon. We've just been having a nice conversation and swapping a few anecdotes about old times. The whole purpose of these interviews with extraordinary people is to inspire young people into believing in themselves and what they can achieve within their lives. And so I've invited a number of people, most of whom that I know reasonably well, to tell their life story and act as an inspiration for other people in the same way that they've inspired me over the years. So I first met Professor Tim Foresman, I think it was about 2003 in Brno in the Czech Republic, when both of us were attending one of the International Symposium for Digital Earth events. And this is where I was doing a presentation about community technologies and how technology can be used to help people share knowledge and trade with each other and build social and economic wealth. And as a result of that, or partly as a result of that, I was very privileged to be a presenter at a conference that Tim was responsible for organizing at Berkeley University in California. But that we'll come on to that later. I'm not going to steal Tim's thunder. I'm going to ask him to tell us a little bit about himself and some of the influences in his life and what's inspired him and actually what he's up to now. So it's over to you, Tim.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here on the Dave Wortley Show, and it is a great privilege to have you as a friend and count you as such. So, and I love your picture. In case the people aren't aware, that's actually the house that I live in the Patapsco Valley State Park. It's a state park in the state of Maryland in the US of A. So I'm 30 minutes north of the White House, and that's a good, you can figure that one out. So as soon as I hit my share screen, there it is. All right, what have we got? Aha. And we hit share. All right, so thank you for that great lead in. And I will share with all the listeners and viewers. That's me in my woods. I've been lucky to have grown up and spent much time in the woods, and as a child was roamed free as a child for many years. They don't let you do that these days, but we used to just go out first thing in the morning and come back when it was dark, time for dinner, and gained a love of nature and the planet that has stuck with me since my time as a young Boy Scout. In terms of my career and pathway, I would say, and I've got, come on. Nope. There we go. I guess I don't know my own slides. Let me start off here. So from my, I guess, pedigree, as they might say it, I've listed here things in my career achievement, and we'll back into it. I served as the chief scientist for the United Nations Environment Program in Nairobi, Kenya. That was quite an adventure, and it did teach me what it was like to be a minority. As you might see in that lower picture, there's one white guy and everybody else is of African descent. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. In fact, I keep telling people in the United States, it's the first time that I did not experience racism was my time in Africa. That's an American construct. It is not happening in Kenya. So I was also a NASA scientist, and I had the good fortune of helping shepherd in what you know as Google Earth, and gave 4 young programmers their first contract. They were bought out by Google, and this was a chance to take digital Earth and let people connect with what the meaning of digital Earth is. And so I served as the chair of the Digital Earth Interagency Coordinating Committee, which was 17 federal agencies. I also served in both the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Defense as a scientist, and was at the very beginning of ecology and environmental research in both those fields, and was helped lead the beginning of remote sensing, use of satellites and airplanes to monitor the planet for the Environmental Protection Agency. So it was fun to be in the front of many of these things that we take for granted today, many unknowns, and very exciting time in my life. I also was a US Navy frogman, and I will talk about that in a minute. And I've had great adventures, from making an award-winning movie about whales, written books, taken many safaris down to Mexico and other places, leading people. Was a sailor, was varsity sailing and sailed many times, surfed for many, many, many years. And now I'm an eco steward. I'm responsible for 8 acres in the Patapsco Valley Park. So my love for the planet and care for it continues. A big part of why I fell in love with this planet had to do with Captain Jacques Cousteau. And I was extremely fortunate at 14 years old to be sent to the Smithsonian Institute for a summer program in which the captain himself and some other oceanographers were leading it. But when they broke into groups, I ended up spending a week with the captain, and it changed the trajectory of my life, because I said, I want to be like you. And he said, if you do, then you're going to have to take math, chemistry, physics. And so I did. And it was like he was always over my shoulder saying, keep up with your homework. And I did. The other thing that he influenced me was I ended up being conscripted by Richard Milhouse Nixon into the military. And so I ended up becoming a Navy frogman. Now, I don't actually have a picture of those days, because all my photos were lost in a house fire. But the guy in the middle below looks a lot like I did back then. There's an older version of me. But in those days, I would just tell you that it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of hard work, but it was a lot of fun. And however, I didn't like the idea of going and actually harming other people. So it took years to deprogram myself from that aspect. But it did teach me things that, believe me, I would have never learned on my own. Now, before they were sending me to Vietnam because of my new skills, because of my test scores, they said, you can go to the US Naval Academy or you can go to Vietnam. And that's me in the middle. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'd rather go to the Naval Academy than Vietnam. And I'm glad I did. So that was a good experience for me. I left after 2 years because my service was over, and began to use what we call the GI Bill. And that's the government will fund you to go to college. I gotta move something here for a second. The government will fund you to go to school. And it's a wonderful program because it paid for my education mostly. And so I went to San Diego State, where I took up surfing and biology. I ended up continuing at San Diego State in a wonderful, wonderful university, where I picked up a master's in ecology and learned about remote sensing. At University of Southern California, USC, I picked up a second master's degree in engineering, and UC Santa Barbara is where I received my PhD in the field of quantitative geography. So with that, I was ready to take on the world, and that I did. I traveled around the world, as I said before, including Africa, time in Africa. That's there's a Great Wall of China behind me in that upper right picture. You know what those pyramids are like, and I climbed those in Egypt. While I was in Egypt, I sat there and thought a bit about our friend Alexander the Great and what the world must have been like. And again, because of the great library at Alexandria, that reinforced the ideas of knowledge, scholarship, and what we could do for the planet. And there with Mount Kilimanjaro in the background, standing by myself, and with my bride of 40 years, Joyce, who's been my companion. Now, I haven't been one to sit in the back of the room and watch other people do things. I've always been ready to grab life with gusto. And there's a picture of me on the radio. And as I said, I've got a face for radio, so I have done pretty well on various places to try to communicate the messages of what we're doing with this planet. I also won a dance contest with the Nigerians in Beijing once. So every now and then you win a few things, and there's my award in the middle with the Marine Corps, helping them to protect their Marines and civilians from groundwater contamination and other issues. I have enjoyed starting a band and playing in various places. I've been on the stage with the Prime Minister of New Zealand and had some wonderful experiences. And I found her to be a bright and proper lady and a good leader. And I've been very impressed with New Zealand ever since. My surfing days include many places, but that one is in Bondi Beach in Australia. So wherever I could, I kept up with the adventures, and I'll show you my marriage in China a little bit later. I've tried to communicate what we're doing on the planet and what the issues are, the challenges are, and study those in great detail. And so of my various writings, I've done with the history of geographic information systems, because I was involved with that in getting it started back in the 70s. Visualizing and physical geography, another college textbook, because if you don't see it, you might not understand it. And I like to think about, if we've got all these satellites up there, we should be using them to explain what's going on the planet. And when I speak of satellites, I've written a book for children on that, a fun book to engage children into understanding what's going on with thousands of satellites and how they monitor our planet. And I've also written about the polar bears and what their future might be like. So I try to communicate with children in an honest way so they can figure out and get the challenges and reorient their life in a meaningful way. As I mentioned, I've tried to get as much gusto out of life as I could. I understand this is not a dress rehearsal. And after the military, I took advantage of everything I possibly could. So yes, I've had the sports car with my dog Turbo there, and I've had a lot of dogs, still do. I guess the theme is that I'm enjoying the merry-go-round of life. And as such, wherever I can go and explore and meet people and see sights and help out, I try to do. Obviously, that's Sydney. I was a member of an Australian aeroplane club, which flew gypsy moths, and lived to tell about it. So that was a good thing. At NASA, they never let me fly anything, but I got to help with Earth observation and, as I said, Google Earth. So I've had a pretty good ride in terms of going around the planet. I've had the great pleasure of being one of the founding members of the International Society for Digital Earth. And that introduced me to a lot of wonderful people, including David Wortley, as he said when we first met in Brno. So helping in that leadership has been able to explain, we know how to look at the planet, we know how to measure the things going on. Let's work together on that so that we can manage the great challenges that are facing us, everything from pollution to deforestation, overfishing, and of course, climate change. When I was in the Tibet Plateau, I was volunteered to participate in one of the cultural events and realized that they were setting me up to marry this lady. And of course, you couldn't see the bride to begin with. And it was quite a ceremony. You can see I'm in a good spirits. It was quite colorful. And I thought, I wonder how this is going to work at home. So I went and I asked my wife, I said, is it okay that apparently I have another wife in China? And she goes, well, I guess it's okay as long as she stays in China. So there is Joyce, who's been my life partner and friend, enjoying as we travel around the world, over in Prague, or obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but it is authentically in Australia, holding a koala. And I must say they are quite loving and cuddly. Traveling around, I've had the great pleasure of communicating and meeting with some very great people. And David and I might talk about some of those in a bit. Michio Kaku is over there, a renowned neuroscientist. And I'm having an animated conversation with him because he actually didn't read Richard Dawkins' book fully, and I had to correct him on a bunch of things he was saying. So, but we did it nicely, and you can see he's appreciating it. And to the right is Vint Cerf, who I still communicate with, and I'm in a community. And Vint is the co-inventor with Tim Berners-Lee of the internet. So when you look at the things we're doing and realize it's kind of fun to bump in and meet these extraordinary people, as David says. And what that tends to do for me is realize that I'm very, very lucky, and I feel like I'm on top of the world. So here's another picture of me in the Tibet Plateau, and I will testify that the softest thing I've ever felt in my whole life was a baby yak that I'm holding in my arms in that picture. And so from Key West, Florida originally to the top of the world in Tibet, I figure I've definitely gotten my money's worth out of the ride. Along the way, I had the distinct pleasure of being responsible for a report card on the planet. Now that report card is the Global Environmental Outlook, which I delivered to 190 nations in Johannesburg, South Africa, at the Summit on Sustainable Development. And the problem with that was the grades were all going down precipitously. And since then, they have continued to fall. And this is a problem, because if you're really dealing with an honest report card of the planet and you keep seeing all the progress going in the wrong direction, it's got to wake you up. And it did wake me up. And it's been the motivation behind my life ever since. One of the things that is a bit sad to me, and I've explained this to the children because I talk to a lot of kids, is that by all the measures that we know, we're not doing good. And that all those adults you see in the crowd at these conferences, they have large houses, they have chauffeurs driving them around, they have cooks. And if you think they want to give up any of those things to make the world a better place, you don't understand human nature. And yet we have to understand human nature. And that's what's been driving me. We can't just castigate and blame these people for all the fault. We have to figure out how to bring collectively these people together so we can make a difference. Because as we look at the issues that are on the planet, the sixth mass species extinction, global warming, etc., is this some big conspiracy? Is there a small group in a back room that's causing this to happen? Well, I think that it's a result of all of us being involved, and all 7.6 billion of us on the planet, and that we need to do something about it. And we need to do it in a day and time when we're still confused how we relate with technology. We're still confused, are we driving it or is it driving us? And the recent information on artificial intelligence and social media and how the conspiracy theories are being spread, which led to things like the mob insurrection on the Capitol building in our country, means we better understand more what the factors are driving this. Otherwise, we're not going to be in a position to do good works. And so as I've sat back these last couple of years, I realized that Spaceship Earth, which Buckminster Fuller popularized that term, that this planet is our spaceship. It is what supports our life totally as we travel through the Milky Way galaxy. That there are only 3 control levers. And I wrestled with this and thought about it and talked about it, and this is what has come up. So I will share that with you briefly, that there are only 3 three levers which control all of our factors on the planet. And those are rules, markets, and lifestyles and behaviors. So with the first one, with rules, well, we've got rules and we've got rulers. And that's part of what happens when we look at things like the climate change, the Paris Peace Accord, the Paris Climate Accord. It's only as effective as the leaders who are running it. And as we know, some of them work, some of them don't work. I'm very pleased to say that these pictures have changed since January the 20th of this year. Thank you very much. However, for the last 4 years, what the Facebook, we have been wondering what has been going on. So the issue with rules and rulers is that we as individuals might not have as much control as we wish. Now, the second lever is markets, and markets are a phenomenal thing. And many people enjoy playing the markets, and you can play it at home with your Monopoly board. I'm sure there's other games similar, but this is what's really moving the goods and is causing extraction, manufacturing. This is creating the economic power and flux which we're all involved with. And so when I look at markets, I think of what are the things we can do as human beings within those markets. Big shark fin soup in China, you try to do something about it. The idea that they would kill a whale shark just to take his fin off, just to put it in for a window display, is anathema to my whole existence. And so I got to spend time with Greenpeace, the Rainbow Warrior, this captain, and we had a delightful day talking about what is it that citizens can do to change markets. So markets are very, very powerful in our lifestyle, in our world, I mean. The third control lever is the one that we have the most control over, but without the other two levers, it won't matter. So it's important to realize all three control levers matter. And it's the lifestyles and behaviors that we're responsible for. Now, when we see the most egregious examples, and as I pointed out, I had a sports car. It was silver, not red, but that how I behave, how I treat other people, how I involve myself with the markets in my consumption patterns, etc., is important for me. And it's important to show examples of it. But the key is all those levers have to be pulled, or we're not going to get where we want to go. And so these days I spend a lot of time thinking about, again, that's why Michio Kaku is important in terms of the neurobiology, how our brains work. Why are we being told to buy things, and why do we buy things without thinking? Why do we vote for somebody without thinking? All the aspects of our lives. So thinking about that and spending more and more time trying to understand the science of the mind and how much control we might have of the mind includes thinking about ancient studies, things that are 2,600 years old, where they've been exploring this. And so from anywhere on the planet where we understand a little better how our minds work, that's what I've been interested in as of late. So these are the basic elements in a thumbnail sketch of how I was motivated, where I came from, and what I'm doing now. And that's the great Buddha of Kamakura, which is about 1,200 years old. So I thank you for your attention on this, and I hope that we can continue with our friend David here to talk about a few items.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. You never disappoint me. Always inspiring, always with a sense of humor, always very thought-provoking. And you've achieved an enormous amount in your lifetime, and you've been very influential. Before we actually go into discussing some of the issues that you raised in your story, what is it that you're actively involved in now to shape the planet? What kind of projects are you involved in now?
Well, one project I'm involved with, we're using the term neighbor hub, which actually the Swiss have, if you look them up, we've discovered they're doing something with neighbor hubs as well. And the idea that we're going to have to build our communities, our villages, need to communicate, need to know each other, begin to interact with each other more so that there's more local action, bartering, purchasing, and more involvement on the issues of good earth stewardship along with citizenship. And so I'm working with experiments on bringing people together through music and food and lectures, and also repairing devices. So people bring in their devices, we help fix them for them so they don't put them in the landfill. Ways of engaging actively with communities to say, we can be better and we should be better, and in a cultural sustainability sense. And this has been, I've been involved with a lot of very interesting people as a result, including Jane Fonda and the Fire Drill Fridays that Greta Thunberg helped kicked off. So engaging, supporting, going to events of that nature. And lately been writing up the experience so that we can help communicate what these neighbor hubs, what it means and how it can be meaningful to improve the life of any community. So that's been that occupies a lot of my time. And at the other, and I guess it has to do with being a septuagenarian like other people I know, that the fact that how we treat our older people, how we treat our elders, and what does the last chapter hold for them is driving me to do a little bit of work to try to make sure that people can live happily ever after, as we say in the fairy tales, but make it meaningful. And we have improved a lot in the last 40 years. 40 years ago, we did not have hospice in the United States of America. No one knew what that word meant. Now we have hospice, which means that when the time comes to join the cosmic plane, that you do it in peace and love and perhaps in your own home. So I certainly hope that my last breath is in that house behind your head in the image, where I can feel very spiritually connected to the land and the work that I've done and can continue. So those two major areas are there. Then there's always giving talks and lecturing. And my lecture circuit was truncated. You may know that we had a little bit of a virus thing going on in the United States. May have hit over your way too. And it was March last year. I was set to do a high school. So some 1,200 kids, maybe even more, all at once. And that was the biggest audience of high school kids that I was doing. So that got derailed, and we'll have to pick that up after the conference. But I do enjoy talking to young kids, and I do enjoy helping them think through their career paths. What kind of a life do they see for themselves, for their family, and what do they see for the planet, and what we can do collectively. Because we do want to give them, we want to inspire them, we want them to continue to be good citizens. Not everybody's going to be a scientist, but if you're a good citizen, you're doing a strong contribution for this planet. And this is what we try to give them, the fundamentals, so that they can navigate their way through a very complex world where social media is telling them things, and want to prepare them so that they can think critically about these issues.
Yeah, well, they're wonderful projects to be involved in, and they're very much things that I'm interested in. As the very first time that we met in Brno, your neighbour hub idea was very much along the lines of the ComNet project that I was involved with in Market Harborough. And I think if there is anything positive to say about the virus, in inverted commas, that you're experiencing and we're experiencing now is, and I appreciate your views on this. For me, coronavirus is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is a terrible disease which can result in an extremely painful death, particularly amongst the most vulnerable in society, the elderly, people with pre-existing medical conditions. So we can't lose sight of that. But on the other hand, it's possible that coronavirus might be the wake-up call. It might be our last chance saloon to do something about the future of our planet. And the one thing that I think positive that has come out of this, and you probably observed as well in the USA, is that because we've had lockdowns and because we've had a lot of people in need in communities, then we have had to focus to community life. And in our village community, in our local town, Jackie, she's been involved in delivering food parcels to people. And what I'm seeing is that people are coming together in communities because they realize that that may be for quite a long time the way in which we will have to operate in our lives. We'll be denied the chance that you and I have both been lucky to have, to travel around the world and meet different cultures. So we have to focus more on our own community. And so I think in that sense, coronavirus is an opportunity for us to build a better future, which is more community-based. It's more caring for your local environment. And maybe that will have some influence on the psychology and our attitudes and our behaviors. What would you say about that?
Well, two thoughts come up. One is that the pronouns, if we begin to quit thinking about I and we start thinking about we, that's an important transition. And the idea of the narcissistic generation, the me generation of the 80s, 90s, people have said things of that nature, hopefully will be transitioned to a we community where the village and the neighbors are extremely important, because they're the ones, they're the 911s, they're the emergency. If you have an emergency, if your neighbors weren't there, you'd be in real trouble. So we need to depend on them. I think back, well, Emmanuel Ram, there's one quote, says, no good catastrophe should go unwasted. So we got to say, hopefully there are some positive seeds that have been planted. And I think about our, if you will, cultural evolution, and Jared Diamond, I think, has written about this and others, in that why did Europe succeed compared to, say, Africa and other places that had been around for a long time? But what kind of competitive advantage could it be to be up in with the inventions that had come out of Europe? And one of the hypotheses was that, well, in the winter, you're hunkered down with your neighbors trying to keep warm. You're in the house. You're not out doing things. Whereas in the tropics, you're roaming around because you can go every place. Now, whether that's true or not, I just would say that it's a reasonable hypothesis that if you're inventing things because you're locked into a cabin trying to stay warm all winter, you're focused on just that one thing until you can develop it. And so it may be true, it may be not, but through this COVID insular, this being stuck at home, not going about, we've also had that opportunity to think about things, what's more important in our lives. And I hope that does resonate. I hope that does stay around. And it would be my fervent hope that the idea of delivering food and thinking about the food processing, the food process in general, can be improved and people can share. I'm not saying this to brag, but I can just tell you that when we got our COVID relief funds, we put it into the local food bank. We said, why do we need it? And converted it into donations to food banks in Florida and in Maryland. So had it not been for COVID, I probably wouldn't have put that much money into the food bank. But now it makes me think about those poor people that can't go out or don't have the benefit that we have. And so you begin thinking of the lesser of our brethren, and that's an important construct to get in our heads and reinforce at this time. So yes, I think, and then learning how possibly to utilize technology. So it's not just for pornography anymore. You know, people can use this technology for wondrous things. And the Zoom, Skype, which I had used Skype since 2002 that I can remember. But now doing it on a regular basis instead of just occasionally, and using it to communicate and maintain with a variety of different groups, Elders for Climate Action, a variety of groups that once or twice a week I'm on a Zoom meeting with them. That has changed significantly, my modus operandi. So that's improvements that we see. We still, it is still sad that half the people don't believe vaccinations are going to work. I mean, the reality that half the people in this country think very funny, and we're seeing the anti-vaxxers and other people, you know, it's tough. You show them science, you try to, you hope that we can do improvements, but you might remember my old adage, you can lead a horse to data, but you can lead a horse to data, but you can't make him think. You know, we can show people what's going on, but we can't force them to think.
No. Well, on that note, there's a comment from my friend Margaret, whom you have met on my 70th birthday party, and she talks about her Facebook page. Now, I know Margaret a long time, and she'd been a very good friend over the years, and she has some quite strong views over social media and other areas of life. So the point that she's making, I think, in the chat is that Facebook is not just a force for opportunity for good, it's used for bad as well. And so in her case, she's saying that she uses it to try and make a difference to the world by saving animals, the planet, and other good causes. So she doesn't post pictures of what she ate yesterday. That's one of the criticisms that she's made of me over the years, and I take the point. But Margaret, I'm so glad that you're able to join us, and I hope you've enjoyed some of the pictures of the landscape that I've been posting over the last few weeks. So I don't have so many over pictures of my my food, but these interviews with extraordinary people, like the one that I had with Robert last week, the guy who walked to both the North and the South Pole, and my friend Chris Blake, who had driven across Siberia in his Austin 7. As a baby boomer generation, do you think that our generation has been the most fortunate that's ever existed in human life?
Well, I definitely do, but I wanted to respond to the comment that the movie, and I'm not sure I spelled dilemma right, but the movie Social Dilemma, I highly recommend it. It's an hour and a half. It was on Netflix, because it goes in with the various people, the engineers that developed the AI behind Facebook and Twitter and Google. They are interviewed, and they're scared to death of what's gone on, and they won't let their kids use any of the machines. And one of the gentlemen who had developed, these are the very top people that developed it, and one admits that he can't fight his addiction of looking at the phone all the time. So people that developed it are struggling with it, and it answers a lot of issues, and we should be concerned.
So do you
Now,
think, looking at Tim Berners-Lee, because I think the invention of the internet and digital technologies generally was really a quantum step in human history, particularly the internet and the way that it's moved through Web 2.0 to the social media they have today. Do you think Tim Berners-Lee and Vint Cerf ever regret those early days? Do they think they've created a Frankenstein monster, with this?
I do hear Vint a lot. I haven't heard Tim Berners-Lee as much, in terms of concerns, but I don't follow him as closely. But they do think we need to step up the game, that we do need to not just we've opened Pandora's box, that's fine, but now we need to cultivate this. And so there are things we need to do. And with anything, the invention of gunpowder, whatever it is that we've invented, if you like fireworks, the invention of gunpowder was good. But there's a lot of things that have, as you said, two-edged sword that's involved with this. If you erase the internet and you erase these issues and try to think about society, I can tell you right now, I certainly wouldn't want to be fighting the coronavirus without those. So when we look at the technologies that have advanced us in our ability to do processing, computational processing, and share information around the planet, we would be in no position with the technologies that we had. Although yes, we smallpox and polio were taken care of back in those days, but not at the speed. It took 10, 15, 20 years. And if we had to wait 10, 15, 20 years to get rid of COVID, we all wouldn't be very happy. So it has compressed things. I think the issue is that our brains haven't evolved. Our brains haven't evolved to handle this. Too many things happening too fast, or I often express it as the idea of exponential thinking. Exponential thinking is not something we do innately. In fact, I did some deep thinking about this some time ago and learned from China and all around the world that our numbering system, if you don't go to any schooling, your numbering system is 1, 2, 3, many. So in China, er san su means 1, 2, 3, many in essence. And if you go into the Amazon and meet one of our loincloth brethren and ask them to count, and they've done this, so this is easy to check up on what I'm saying, it's 1, 2, 3, many. Because how many bananas are in the trees? Or 1, 2, 3, many. How many tigers are in the woods? 1, 2, 3, many. The things you need to know to survive are limited to that. But the things in our life are now exponential. Population growth, increase of CO2 in the atmosphere, resource extraction. And we have no ability in our brains innately to understand that. We have artificial constructs like log tables and logarithms to be able to figure out how to handle exponential. And we wrestle with 1 or 2, but the truth is all of these are coming together at once. And so when I look at that, I go, okay, fundamentally, our brain is not engineered to understand exponential in a way that will help us in our daily activities. Therefore, this is where computers can definitely handle exponential. And we're going to need them. We're going to need artificial intelligence. So one way or another, we're going to have to grab that sword, which has 2 sides on it. We're going to have to grab that sword and use it to help us figure out what's going on in the future. And I would say that I'm looking forward to the time when every time you do for a zoning plan, anytime you're going to adjust your farming arrangement and crop dispersal, that the computers will back you and it'll be computational, and we will have precision farming, which we see now such terms as precision farming and what it means to have sustainable farming, because our accuracy of the fertilizer and the watering and the plants are done so well. Well, we need precision zoning so that the houses are located and that the highways are located in a sustainable long-term way. So sustainable cities in the new cities, if we handle those with our best and brightest people and computationally in the internet to share this information, that gives me hope. It's not the same world that I grew up running around in the woods as a kid from daybreak to dawn, from dawn to dusk, but it's not the same world, because there were only 2.5 billion people on the planet when David Wortley was born. Now there are 7.6 billion people on the planet. That's an exponential growth curve. How do we handle it? So again, the technology, we're going to have to embrace it. We're going to have to figure these things out. But while we're doing that, if we use the lessons from COVID to say, but it's the village, it's the community where the rich relationships are. This is where we are. And up till just even a few years ago, 50% of the people in the United States, the facts are here, had never gone farther than 50 miles from where they were born. So most of us did not go traveling around the world. So it's an interesting dynamic in terms of our relationship, but it reinforces that our communities, our birth sites, they are important to us. Our connection to the land is very important to us.
Yes, and I'd take you up on that point about being in an exponential world. I perhaps look at it slightly differently. I think in a way we're looking at it is an exponential world. I certainly agree with that, but I also think it is a disconnected world. And by that I mean, when I was born, the world that I came into wasn't really that different from the world that my father was born into. Right. Okay, it's a better standard of living, but people got about in the same way. They lived their lives in the same way. They married into local people within the community. And so I could identify, or my father would be able to recognize the world that I was born into and say that it's not that different from the one that he was born into. But today, when a child is born, it's light years different to the world that his parent was born into. And because of that, it must be very difficult for young kids to be able to identify with the kind of world that we've lived through. So I think we have an obligation to try and do everything we can to make the world a better place, but also help the next generation to be able to adjust to these changes, understand the history of where we came from and where we are now, and use technology in a very positive way. I just want to share just a few pictures with you, as I mentioned to you. We have a kind of common experience, and one of those most memorable experiences I've shared with you was our time at Berkeley when you were the organizer of a National Symposium for Digital Earth conference, and you introduced me to three extraordinary people. And I didn't want to finish our conversation without bringing them into it. And the first of these was Ed Mitchell, one of the Apollo 14 astronauts. Do you want to say a few words about Ed and how you came to know him, what your feelings are about his story?
Good old Dr. Ed Mitchell. He a wonderful, sweet gentleman. And I'm very lucky to have befriended him. And I met him at EONS, which is it's the Institute of Noetic Studies. He started that in Petaluma, California, above San Francisco. And he started that because he wanted to investigate scientifically paranormal, or what we call out of the normal science realm experiences that had occurred as a result of his being the sixth man to walk on the moon. He had experiences up there that were kind of strange to him, and he and all his fellow jet pilots, test pilots, of course, these were military test pilots. They weren't known for being touchy-feely or having feelings like that. So he had no outlet, and yet he thought they should be rigorously investigated, and he hired Uri Geller and others to come in and be a robust investigation of such things. In fact, he did an experiment on his flight, which included guessing numbers from cards that nobody knew about except the people that were on the other end on Earth. And it was statistically valid that he was able to connect with people, but we leave that up to the audience. But Ed, when he had his 80th birthday, it was great time. I was working on him to prepare for the conference at Berkeley, and he got a birthday card that he opened up, and it sang happy birthday. And I got all excited. I said, "Oh, Ed, what are you going to do with that card?" And he goes, "Well, I should recycle it, right?" And I said, "I know, but you're probably going to put it in the trash can." And he goes, "Yeah, I probably will." I said, "Good." Then there was a dozen of us in the room. I said, "Would you tell all of us which had more computational power, Apollo 14, which you landed on the moon, or that birthday card?" And he said, "The birthday card by orders of magnitude."
Yeah.
So how do you put your mind around that? When I talk about exponential thinking, how do you do it? I don't know. It's really a challenge, but he was a wonderful gentleman. And he is missed, and I just felt very fortunate to have called him a friend. One thing, he was hopeful about the technologies we're doing and what could technology do, because rather to fight disenfranchisement, he felt that it had the potential, and I believe that too, to have us upgrade our collective IQ, that the people on planet Earth can upgrade their collective IQ and begin to do things proper. And I see indications of that. And let us hope, for Ed's sake, that is true as well.
Yeah, well, one of the things that stuck in my mind, and I was so pleased to shake his hand and thank him for sharing his story, but I remember that as well as telling how he became an astronaut and showing those fantastic pictures that he took on the mission, and including pictures on the moon, one of the things that he read out was a poem that he wrote after he'd come back from the moon. As you say, it had a profound spiritual effect on him that was reflected in this poem, because the astronauts had to self-isolate for a couple of weeks to try and make sure they didn't bring any nasties back from outer space. And during that time, he wrote this poem, which was on the theme of how small man is compared to the universe. So that had an enormous impact on me. And that leads me on to this wonderful gentleman that I had the privilege to have a coffee break with and talk about his life. Doug Engelbart, not only the inventor of the computer mouse, which he's holding in his hand there, but also the guy behind hypertext and hyperlinks on the internet. And when he presented at your conference, he must have been probably in his 80s then, but he was still burning with desire to learn new things and to be influential. How did you get to meet Doug?
Well, I was fortunate to bump into a group called Next Now, which Doug, Vince Cerf, and many others in the Silicon Valley area had been communicating with. They had formed a community to share information on neurobiology, artificial intelligence. And Doug had been, and he was sweet as the day is long. I feel very fortunate to have count him as a friend in this life. Doug was kind of a real center, a mascot for the whole group, because if you tried to find his ego, you wouldn't find it. And yet here he was, as smart as they ever come. And he was, as you said, a pioneer, coming up with this mouse just to solve a problem, so that we could interface with the technology. So he understood the technology, and he understood that we humans weren't very good at interfacing, connecting. So the hypertext, to think about how we find something and link to another and link to another and link, we all take that as a fait accompli at this point, but he was, as you pointed out, he was the one that got this going. And it's always, he received $10,000 for the invention of that, of the mouse. They did award him $10,000, for which the company, which was Stanford Research Institute, they ended up making billions. So, but you would never know that. He was, money was not something that drove him, and the fact that $1 billion had passed him by had no impact on that man at all.
No,
he also reinforced what Ed Mitchell had said, that the reason we need these interfaces, we need to deal with technology, is to upgrade the collective IQ of the population of this planet. And so I did not promote that. This was two independent men saying, if we can't use technology to upgrade our collective IQ, then we're going to be in a big challenge. So therefore, the challenge is, how do we do that? How do we apply this technology? And that's why I'm such a fan of David Wortley, because you have expressed and focused your energy on just exactly that. How do we interface? How do we use the technology? How can we upgrade our collective intelligence? How can we make life in a village better? Very fundamental issues.
And that brings me finally to this amazing guy. I was fortunate enough to be in a panel discussion where he was one of the panelists, along with Melanie St. James, another amazing person. But just tell us about John Francis, aka Planet Walker.
Again, these are so many great human beings. It's just so wonderful. And John Francis, who is his official title with the National Geographic Society, I think, is an explorer, is a senior explorer, some term of that nature, and so he still works with them. He was profoundly impacted by the big oil spill off of California back in the 60s. And it had such a profound impact on him to watch what was going on, society's exploitation of resources, and yet the damage to the planet, that he made a vow of silence and didn't speak for almost 20 years and refused to get in a car. He walked everywhere, which is why he's called the Planet Walker. So in this 2 decades of silence and only walking, he ended up getting a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD, again, without ever speaking, and walking across the country to the various places he needed to go. In doing so, and they've often said this, and I guess we all know it, if we learn to listen a little better, we might be better people. We don't need to just talk. So this is the original listener, if ever there was one. And a man of silence. He finally broke it after 2 decades, but a man of silence and serious inter-reflection. A man who really asked the deep questions, and as they say, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. This is a gentleman that did it by not talking. And a fascinating individual to this day, a mentor for many, and he also works with kids to let them know their potential in life and the paths they go. So it's a path I couldn't even have conceived of, and to have met him and seen what a genuine good human being this is, and I'm so glad that you raise him up in this conversation. My heart just bubbles just thinking about the quality of these 3 individuals that you have brought to the forefront.
Yeah, I think to conclude, Tim, and I thank you so much for giving your time this afternoon, is we have both been extraordinarily blessed by the people that we've met in our lives and the inspiration that they've given us. And I know that you do a lot of talks to schools, and you did some talks to schools when you came over to visit me in the UK, one school in Wigston in Leicester, and my granddaughter's school in Northampton. And both of those, you had a wonderful reception from the kids when you were talking about satellites. So I hope with the connections that I'm hoping to build through these stories that there will be opportunities for you to be able to speak directly to schools within the UK. If you're willing to do that, if we get the right audience for you, we've got the technology with Zoom, and I'd be very happy to have a discussion or facilitate some discussions with schools and presentations so that you can share your story and the stories of these amazing people with the next generation. So Tim, God bless you for joining me today and for your spirit and your life as a human being. You're a wonderful mentor and inspiration to me, and I hope that over sometime in the future that we will get the chance to meet physically again, and not be limited to me seeing my picture with your house in the background. But you'll always be welcome at the old barn, and you'll always be welcome in our household. So thanks for joining. Any concluding remarks, Tim, before I close?
I thank you for the opportunity. You are also a mentor. It's a two-way street, quid pro quo, and I appreciate our friendship. But really, above all the friends I have, what you're doing is promoting others. What you're doing is getting those stories out, and this is such an important time to do that, and we need to. So I want to thank you for this continued effort, pioneering work that you do, sir.
Thank you very much, Tim, and have the great rest of the day. It's we don't have the amount of snow that you've got in your back garden, but it's very cold here. It's apparently it's been around -10 or -11, which is almost unheard of in the UK. So it's a little bit chilly. So I'm going to get back to the household and warm myself in front of the Arga. But awesome. Keep up the good work, Tim. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.